Welcome to Civically Grown, where change makers share the roots of their leadership and the impact they're cultivating today. I'm your host, Dr. Shanice Prince. Hi, everybody. I am so glad we have a wonderful guest today. We have Dr. Aliaa Remtilla. She is a Harvard-trained anthropologist, executive coach, and startup founder. I love this. She's done research in over 20 countries, led nonprofit programs across 3 continents, and raised over $1 million as a co-founder of a VC-backed tech company. And now she works with high-achieving professionals at a crossroads, helping them move through fear, find clarity, and build lives and careers that actually fit. Aliaa, thank you so much for joining Civically Grown today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So, one question I always start with is what song represents your leadership growth and why?
I actually like the first one that came to mind was Britney Spears' Stronger. And there was just this something about I just like the stronger than I was yesterday and this idea of continuous growth. And then I looked at the lyrics and was like, oh no, this is not right at all.
I'm glad you said that because every time I look at lyrics, I'm always surprised.
Exactly. It's like the one sentence that stands out from the one refrain that stands out from that song is the only bit that fits. So I went back and I thought a little bit more. And the one that I think that it's really on point is Lean on Me.
That's beautiful. And why did you
Mm.
pick that song?
It's like I feel like this is at the core of my leadership style that emerged since I was a kid, right? This idea that and I don't know, if there's something feminine about this as a leadership style, but this idea that I lead through support and presence and through just kind of that human to human connection as opposed to from a place of just strength and authority. Like that's definitely not my leadership style at all. It's much more look like I'm here, I want to listen, I want to be there, I want to hear what you guys have to say and let's work on this. And where possible, really, develop those relationships individually so that everyone feels supported, like they have someone to lean on.
All right, that's beautiful. And it also really makes me realize why you're a coach now because
Exactly.
you're helping people do that and they can lean on you and you see them grow and blossom. So let's talk about your youth leadership experience. So we heard what you're doing in adulthood, but what do you think sparked that earlier in life?
I think there's a question of how did this even start, right? Even before what the question of what was the leadership work that I was doing as a kid. And it's like my mom, like my parents, really. My parents both migrated separately to Canada and met in Vancouver. They came from Tanzania. Both of them are 2 to 3 generations Tanzanian. We're South Asian originally, ethnically, but 3 generations in Tanzania before migrating post-independence in the 1970s. And when they came here, they had very little. When they were living in Tanzania, their families weren't wealthy either. And they set up their life together. Both of them they had ambition and they
Mhm.
had ambition for us. And mom applied that very concertedly in her early years, as when we were young, by putting us into every single club there was that was possible. By, I think I did ballet. I learned the harp. To play the harp, I played the piano. My did violin for 6 months. My sister played the flute. I did pottery classes. And this was before I was in grade two, from a
Wow.
very young age. Learned to swim before I could walk. It was literally I went to ski classes because, we just had to do everything. I and we loved it. It
You did
was
everything,
literally
really.
literally everything. So I think that's where it comes from, right? Is this kind of mentality that, we've come here. There have been numerous challenges in our history, and you're in a position of opportunity. So what are you gonna do with this opportunity? And we're here to set you up for success and to support you in every way possible.
So, out of all those activities, what are some of the highlights for you, especially when you think about youth experience leadership?
Yeah. So as we grew, there were a few different things that we kind of naturally gravitated to, and I think I will give them credit to have given us the ability to say, actually, it's not going to be ballet for me. It's not going to be music, and for me, it was sport. So field hockey was I ended up getting recruited, and that's how I got into Harvard. So it became very important strategically, and it started from a relatively young age. And then there were a number of other things that we did. Like we went to an all girls school, and I was picked as house captain in as early as grade 6. So there's a certain type of leadership that you kind of learn from there. And like I was in the video club. That was another thing I chose. A little bit, making movies, which I think in the 1990s was quite revolutionary.
Do you have a movie that you really loved making during that time?
There were so many highlight reels, like, they were like, it was that kind of like it was the MTV era, right? So, it was
I
all
remember
about
that.
picking the song and then creating the montage to it, but it was very manual at the time. Yeah, it was, I mean, yeah, it was fascinating. And then there's peer tutoring, so I think one of the things that I think motivated leadership for me at that time was that socially, I was quite anxious, awkward, perhaps lacked a little bit of self-esteem, and because I was very capable and smart and good at what things I did, maybe not because of that, but that was, like, where I was strong, but I also struggled to have friends, and I actually think that my overachieving was a result of being nervous around who to have lunch with at school. And so it was like, well, let's see what clubs there are that I could join, And so there's this side of it where stepping into leadership was almost a product of a vulnerability.
I think that is a really important point because many times people think of leadership as that student who feels confident they can take over the world. But I think it's interesting how you brought up that point of that was a way of protection and having something to do. And I mean, talk more about that. That's really
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, sure. One, so I'm in a Smiley Muslim, and a big part of my upbringing was, I mean, it's not church, it's not mosque, it's a Jamaat Khana, that's our space of worship, and going to Jamaat Khana on a nightly basis was very important to my parents, and also one of the biggest sources of fights in our family because field hockey practice or Jamaat Khana, and we did not agree all the time. But going to Jamaat Khana was always very difficult for me because it was one of the areas where socially I felt like I didn't have friends in my peer group. And so this was a space that I was going to regularly and socially couldn't find a space for myself. And one of the things and that mom and dad ended up doing was saying that, okay, you know what? We're all going to be volunteers in this space. And volunteers within the Jamaat kind of space, there's actually a physical uniform that you put on, and it's structured. There are specific roles that volunteers do. And the uniform was super uncool.
How did the
And
uniform look?
it was a gray skirt with, well, a white blouse, a black blazer, and then like this like red tie. And there was a certain gray skirt that everyone wore that was like 3/4 line through the knees and was like super uncomfortable to sit in. And so mom was like, fine, you can wear like, you can pick a different skirt, just have it be a gray skirt. And, like, now everyone wears pants, like, it's all fine, but in those days, mom was like, "How could you wear pants?" Well, this is the '90s, you're still kinda this isn't the same. Early '90s, actually, this is probably late '80s, early '90s, but anyway, so this was sort of one of the things where mom was like, "Hey, you're gonna put on the" at this point, like, I'd lost all social capital there was, I had no friends, so fine. I was the only uncool kid who was also the volunteer, and essentially what that meant was that I was like, when it came to appointing leadership positions, I was really the only one in my age group to pick, because no one else was wearing a volunteer uniform. But what I will say is that even before that point, putting on the volunteer uniform gave me something to do. So it actually what mom's vision was right? Like, it gave me a space in Jamaat Khana where now I didn't need to worry about friends because I could be doing practical activities. It's the same thing as, like, not having someone to eat lunch with. And the reason why I go through this whole context is because I think this is one of the areas where, like, it's just the most stark, where I felt super awkward. The minute you got a badge and you wore this badge, I think that badge gave me a sense of confidence and place. And in locating, like, it was like the badge was what I needed in the first instance to say, "Yeah, you belong.
Mhm.
Here is a role." And it somehow allowed me to lighten up and relax into my own self. Like, if I think about my engagements with the younger kids that I was managing, so I was in grade 10, 11, 12 when I had this role, and I was managing the young volunteers who were, like, in grades 6 to 9, right, or 5 to 8, and that relationship felt so natural, and I could just be me and create these bonds and really be the older role model to these kids, create structure, do what I needed to do in a way that was natural and authentic, but only kind of emerged in the first instance because someone trusted me.
What I loved about that is when you talked about that badge gave you a sense of place and how belonging is so important. And
Yeah.
sometimes when people think about leadership, they think about not belonging. So it's great to
Mhm.
hear in this instance, it was a place of belonging. And how can we have more experiences like that for young people where they have a place to belong and develop their leadership skills? And you were able to be a mentor to the younger students. And that seemed like a place that you felt very comfortable in. I'm sure it really impacted them in a positive way. So now I want to move on thinking about these youth leadership experiences to now. How did those early leadership experience influence the way that you lead today?
Yeah. So if even in that specific instance, there were so many of those young kids that I ended up building these one-to-one relationships with, right? It's exactly what I do as a coach. And I think that this type of ability to create these deep relationships that build trust, this ability to say, "Yes, you are someone who I will listen to when I get asked to do something I don't wanna do, because I trust you as a person, and I respect you enough to know that you probably have a good idea or a good reason for what you're doing." So the other thing that I'd say is there's this idea that, that having to put on the badge is what made me feel worthy in the first instance. I think a lot of my growth as I've become an adult leader has been to believe my worthiness is innate.
Okay. So it's like a shift happened. You had the badge, but then it was you.
And it could have gone the other way, right? Like, I've seen a lot of folks who lean into this more and more and more, where the badge gives them more and more of the ego has such a negative connotation, but even in a positive way, the sense of a presence and owning and commanding that. Whereas I think for me, I made a bit of a conscious decision. I had this one pivotal conversation with a friend. Like, as smart, intelligent women, we often get positioned as intimidating. I was very conscious about, what do I want to do with this? So, do I want to continue to be the type of person that people look to and say, "Oh, you're super intimidating," and together with the word intimidating means that I am going to respect you because you have something that I don't have, and, I'm like, you're clearly smart and articulate and confident and all of these things, or do I wanna change that?
It's
Yeah.
interesting that you said that, how people just made the assumption that you're intimidating, even though I would say in my case, I'm friendly, I smile, and then some people can still think that. I don't know if that was how it was in your case, but how did you change that? Because it doesn't change your background. People
No.
know that you're very accomplished. So
Mm.
how did that change?
I think I was intimidating because I was so obsessed, and I'm intellectual, right? So I'm, like, so interested in the idea itself. The natural response for me is to engage with the idea versus first stepping back and seeing where that person is.
I see.
And I think that was a decision for me to make where and the decision I made was that I actually don't want, I want people to see me as approachable. I felt like I couldn't achieve my mission if people didn't feel first that they could connect with me as a human.
Mm. That's really resonating with me because I've been
Mm.
having thoughts about how we need to humanize people and not dehumanize people. We're people first. And the approach makes a huge difference in how we relate to each other, what we can get done, the successes that we can have. So I love to hear that you're saying, I'm humanizing myself, I'm humanizing the people I'm talking with. It's not my ideas first, it's who are they first. Oh, wow.
Exactly, exactly. And that requires humility. So for me, that's the word, right? That's been the shift in my adult form of leadership. And you can see how big a change it is from being a young kid who was socially anxious, who who had to have a badge to give me a sense of worthiness, and who
Hmm.
would overcorrect because there's a sense of, as a leader, okay, it's because I'm a leader that I am worthy, to a sense of innate worthiness combined with, you need innate worthiness. You need to believe you're worthy to
Right.
have humility, true humility. That is not self-effacing.
I love that. You have to believe you have worth to have true humility.
Yeah,
Sometimes people think you can't think of yourself in a positive way, but you can have both.
you have to. I don't think it's humility if it's self-effacing.
Okay, that's good. And I think that gives other people freedom to say, I can be myself, I can have positive esteem about myself, and really have that positive esteem towards others.
That's it. I can believe I am worthy and believe that I have more to learn.
So, with that, I want to ask, especially with this new change in how you were viewing leadership, what has been a challenge that you've had with leadership? And then what was a way that you overcame that challenge? Because in this podcast is full of leaders and we're here encouraging each other and giving each other things from our toolkit. So what's something that you would say about that?
This arose working in a context that was very male dominant, that had particular perspectives and a bit of a double standard around how women could act as leaders.
What was that?
So this idea that women who were over outspoken, had strong opinions, it was much more difficult for us to succeed. And so it was, how do you actually affect change in a context like that,
Yes.
while still maintaining a strong sense of self? I think for me, the key lesson there was that it's not about you, it's about the outcome. And how do you do what is needed to get the outcome you need, as opposed to the recognition? I think for me, one of the biggest challenges that I faced as a leader, and this, you triggered it earlier when you said, I can't remember what exactly it was, but it was this idea that when you are the leader, you become the antithesis, the thing that resistance is against.
Yes.
I ran a program that, this was about 10 years ago, and it was a program that was teaching people to be change makers. And when you're teaching people to be change makers, it's hard when they're trying to change when you're holding status quo. Because what I had to realize halfway through this program was that the fact that I was experiencing resistance from my own staff was
Hmm.
a sign of success of the program itself. And it was very difficult because I've kind of explained how, like, my entire leadership style is very consultative. Actually, the consultative style didn't work because that's not what my team needed of me. They actually needed me to hold a ground they could resist so that they could put into practice what I was trying to get them to learn.
Something that I'm hearing from this too is some people talk about adaptive leadership, that you have to put the
Yeah.
pressure on in order to have people move. But I also hear that before when you're talking about humanizing or really just seeing what other people need, you saw what they needed, and that required you to get in a different role than you had been cultivating. And so I think that's really neat to talk about how you have to see the scenario and adapt to what's needed.
Yeah. It's very hard to do. I mean, it's easier to reflect back on 10 years later. In the
Yes.
moment, it's pretty wrought with emotion, right?
Well, I like though this reflecting piece. Like for instance, whenever I have something that goes wrong, I think, what could I do later in the future so that would go differently? And that's how we get wisdom. And so and listening to other people. So now maybe somebody else can remember your story and say, "Oh, let me make that adaptation before I have to have a program that's not successful."
And realize it's not about you.
I think that's the rub for a lot of leaders because people who are doing leadership where they have to run for office, you kind of have to make it about you in a sense. You don't have to, but a lot of people do. And so
Mm.
it's just a counter narrative than what we're used to, I think, when we think of some leaders. But there's also a lot of type of leaders that you're really bringing that to light right now. So I want to ask you, what advice would you give to leaders at your stage of career? And what advice would you share with young leaders?
I think the young leader one's probably easier. So I think the young leader one is really this point about worthiness, right? You're worthy. You're worthy. And lead from that place of knowledge of your worthiness. You don't need your leadership to make you worthy. So don't use it for that reason, right?
That's so true. And if we have young leaders listening now, they can even take the time to say, I am worthy.
I'd love that.
With or without a title, with or without me doing all these things to have approval, I am worthy. So thank you for that.
Exactly.
So
I think your other part of the question was advice for adult leaders. And I think it would be the contextual point. It's that it's not about you. It's about the end goal for the organization. Whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, that's what you're leading people toward. And so have that be the priority.
I wonder if you could even name the type of leadership that you're doing. Some people have something called like the servant leader. I'm not sure
I
if you
mean,
put in that camp.
I call it the impact leader, right? It's all about impact. So, your success is measured by the impact that's achieved as opposed to anything else really. And impact can be defined in so many different ways. And I think that's part of the process of being a leader is being super clear on what that is. What is the impact you're trying to achieve and how do you measure yourself against that?
I love it too because it takes it off the individual leader and it goes to the impact. So the impact leader. Wonderful. So I'm about to ask my last question, but before I do, is there anything else that you wanted to share today?
The biggest value that youth leadership had to offer me was not even about the leadership or the people that I was managing, but this like, I don't think I ever even thought of myself as a leader because I was also always and continue to also always be a member of another leader's team. And, like there's always someone who's managing you, right?
Right.
Especially when you're young. Like I could be the school captain, but like you're reporting to the principal. And I actually think that the biggest advantage of leadership is exposure to those role models, to those individuals who invest their time to develop me. And as a youth, like, I mean, the dream to go to Harvard came from someone who, like, as I was playing field hockey, I mean, she went to Princeton and she was like, "Oh, you gotta go to Princeton." And, um, Harvard was a better fit, but also that's where the dream came from, right?
Mhm.
It's those relationships and those networks, it's the adult role models and it's the being the benefit of someone else's strong leader.
It's like the cascade of leaders.
Yes. Yes.
mentoring somebody's mentoring you, you're mentoring someone else. It also highlights that we're not on our own path. Our paths are but like interacting with other people, and that's neat, to think that it's not all about me. So the question I like to end with, where every episode is, if your leadership style was a tree, plant, or flower, what would it be and why?
It's the banyan tree. It's got these, like, Sufi aesthetics of knowledge, which I'm, like, clearly a nerd, and but more so, it's, like, the way the roots kinda stem out and more roots get established to create constant growth, and, if I could be the leader that I'd like to be, it would be the type of leader who just proliferates roots and strengthens community as a whole, society as a whole, in that way.
Leah, thank you so much. And to be honest with you, I'm gonna have to look up that plant because it sounds amazing. And I love the interpretation with it. I already can see that I'm gonna learn a lot about botany doing this podcast just from
That's
people
great.
choosing their their pieces of nature that they're gonna share with our listeners. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I know our listeners appreciate it too.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation.
Thank you for listening to Civically Grown. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, stay grounded and keep growing.